Hello and welcome to those that have joined. Thank you very much for giving up some time today. My name's Jamie. I'm the Business Development Director here at Travel Worldwide, and I help sort of lead the ideation and creation of any sort of strategies and propositions for any new clients considering to partner with us. For those of you who haven't come across us before, Travel Worldwide is a total experience agency, and what we mean by that is we think beyond established customer experiences and work with brands to really innovate in their customer journeys, whether that be from online to offline, out of home or in store, as well as looking at internal engagement processes and procedures that create ecosystems to build better products, services, communications, and ultimately better businesses. We've been running these events throughout this year. They used to be physical back in the olden days, and we turned them virtual, obviously. These really help us bring together industry leaders from a diverse range of sectors and companies, and are really designed to provide new points of view and really kind of foster collaborative learning from each other on how we can just deliver new, better, and more total experiences that change the face of businesses today and to better serve your customers and deliver more value. So this is the latest event in our current series called Stronger Than Before, where we'll be speaking with brands and companies that are bouncing back to ensure they emerge stronger than before the coronavirus pandemic. And we'll be asking them, how they've pivoted, innovated, and launched new products and services to meet the changing needs of their audience. And we're really fortunate to be joined by some great panelists today. We've got Tom Hall, who's an advisor and writer at Lonely Planet. Tom's got 20 years experience being a senior leader in travel, and Tom will be sharing his insights from across the world and the opportunities brands can utilize for the decisions that they're needed now and for the future, whether this be a company's way of working, consumer value, go-to-market strategy, and sort of the partnership with technology. So I'm sure there'll be some really hot take-home top tips from him today. Joining Tom is Rachael Smith, Head of Proposition at EasyJet. With EasyJet being one of the first to see the financial and customer impact of COVID, Rachael will be sharing some of the learnings and tactics and the future of the airline, without giving away too much of the secret sauce recipe, I'm sure. But I'm sure we'll all be really looking forward to hearing from Rachel's experience this year at EasyJet. And joining us is with them is our very own Darren Savage, our Chief Strategy Officer here at Tribal. Darren has led projects for various brands such as Nike, Volkswagen, Google, Disney, and has led the retail strategy for Wren Kitchens, which enabled them to grow to become the UK's #1 kitchen retailer. Darren is also a lecturer at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, and as well as the Advertising and Marketing Department at the University of Lancaster. So has a really interesting lens on the world from a consumer behavioural standpoint and a business strategy standpoint. So welcome, panelists. Thank you very much for joining today. So I just wanted to start off really by, I suppose, going around the room and just getting, I suppose, some opening remarks on I guess, what we've all experienced over the last pretty much year, really, as we're kind of getting into Q4. And Tom, I'll start with you if that's all right. Just really keen to sort of see what you've seen this year, what you've experienced, and how things have changed for you.
Well, I could write a book about that, but I guess where I'd start would be just to come back to something which I've spoken to quite a few people about, which is to say that despite the huge changes that we've seen, the COVID situation is not necessarily delivering up anything new for travel. It's just all happening much, much faster. So, we're all sitting here on a digital meeting and conference. Obviously, that has been an acceleration. But in the travel space, there are some big ones that are not just getting going, but accelerating very fast. And really importantly, going to be there on the other side of all this. So I think smart brands, smart organizations are looking to the other side and thinking about the importance of sustainable practices. The World Tourism Organization has been talking a lot about not losing sight of the connection between the tourism industry and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example. In the content space, and I think in terms of the consumer expectation space, the emphasis on diversity and local voices as sources of authenticity for customers. A few other ones I won't go into huge amounts of detail on. The peaking and declining of hyper-popular, high-cost cities, London, New York, Paris, we hear about peaking rents and things like that, and I think from a tourism perspective that's also something that's important. Open air experiences, getting out into the natural world, and also things like cycling, scootering, urban transportation, all just going much faster than they would have otherwise. So lots more really, but they're just a few things that we see going on very much at the moment.
Thank you, Tom. And before I forget as well, whilst we're going around the room, I know Mackay's popped it in the chat here, but please, we like these to be interactive sessions. So whilst we're talking here, please submit any questions, anything that might spark some thinking for you. Please submit that in either the chat box or the question box to myself, and we'll get your questions answered in real time. Now, moving on to you, Rachael, just really interested now I know you've been through a lot, and again, you probably needed an hour-long webinar just on this, but give us all a little bit of an insight into what it's been like over at EasyJet this year.
Yeah, I guess so. I joined EasyJet a year ago now, and it was my first role in aviation and even in the travel industry. I had a background in marketing and advertising before that. And it really was a baptism of fire for anyone that works in aviation. There's a lot of terminologies, there's a lot of acronyms, KPIs that I'd never come across before. Load factor, O&Ds, all of these words. Complete baptism of fire just starting in my role, and then 4 months in, Italy announced that they were closing their borders, and suddenly we had a team of people who were just ripped out of their comfort zones. My boss, the commercial director, kind of pulled me aside and said, look, we need to get a cross-functional team of people who are just going to respond to what we think might be, one of the biggest kind of repatriation programs in history. And sure enough, Italy wasn't the first country to kind of close its borders and say to the airlines, you need to get your people out as quickly as possible. We're not going to be permitting any travel. It's, it kind of spread from the red zones in the north, if you remember, kind of Venice, Milan, and then slowly spread to a full country lockdown. After that, we had markets like Egypt go and say they didn't even allow us to land the planes to rescue or to repatriate our passengers to bring them home. And with that came just challenges that as an airline we'd never really faced before. And look, as a sector, we've been hit by the ash cloud, by different terrorism threats. There's been big impacts that have hit the industry in loads of different ways historically, but nothing really quite on this scale. And I think what none of us really realised at the time was to how long we were going to be in this type of crisis. So look, it threw up loads of big challenges. How do you communicate to customers when the restrictions are changing? Back in February they would change, and March they were changing kind of every day. You can fly to Germany, no you can't. And how does as a business that's digitally led, we're as much a digital travel platform as we are an airline that has planes in the sky, but our systems really weren't set up to take that number of customers who are worried about whether they could take their holiday, worried about whether they could get home, and what were their rights, what should they do, what was our advice. So yeah, huge challenges. And as I said, it kind of kicked off really in February, and hasn't, as I said, hasn't really come off the gas since then, because it's been we're open again, you can travel, oh no you can't, there's quarantine restrictions. So every week it almost feels like you said the word pivot earlier, it kind of feels like almost every month there's new challenges that we're facing as a business and as an industry, and we're having to adjust our tactics, actions, strategies almost weekly as a result.
Interesting. Thank you, Rachael. I'm sure we'll come back to a few of those points shortly. And Darren, working a bit more broadly in our sector and looking at kind of how consumer behaviours have changed. And obviously we've gone through the kind of summer period where briefly everyone kind of got back to getting on planes and taking advantage of that. And now we're kind of almost kind of come back through circle. I mean, really keen to sort of get your viewpoint on consumers this year and how this has changed specifically within, I guess, travel and how we approach that as an experience.
Well, I think we need to take the broadest possible perspective. We're going through one of the greatest experiments in human psychology in history. And I think anybody that works in marketing or product development or what have you, one of the hardest things to do is get people to change or adopt kind of new behaviours. So at a macro level, everyone has had imposed behaviour change upon them. And I think that's really interesting because in terms of our day-to-day life, this imposed behaviour change has gone on long enough when new habits are forming. When it comes to things like travel and tourism, that's not something that people do on a day-to-day basis. You might do it a couple of times a year. You might go for one big family holiday, a couple of city breaks and things away. So it's interesting that when you look at most of the reports that have been coming out, I think both Rachael and Tom mentioned this, there is still very significant latent demand, but there's a supply issue. In terms of restrictions, and also there's a psychological thing, which is I'd like to go, but I'm not quite kind of ready. I think as Rachael might talk about a little bit later on, we were speaking about this yesterday. I think organisations that are able to adapt and put a team on this to essentially do kind of very rapid R&D, testing different things out, seeing what's learning and understanding emergent consumer needs, different kind of preferences are in a good place. I think longer term, and actually in parallel to that sort of more shorter term kind of rapid R&D, I think what needs to happen in the industry is I think there needs to be much more collaboration, because the future state of travel is something that will affect absolutely everybody. Whether you're an organisation like EasyJet that transports people and sells holidays, whether you're an organisation that Tom works for and you develop content and things along those lines, the final kind of context, wherever we net out with, is something that will affect absolutely everybody, whatever part that you play within that. And I'd like to see some sort of wide together innovation. I think that would be really interesting. I think the other thing to track as well is looking at different psychological needs that arise because of COVID or are accelerated because of COVID. And I think people go on holiday for lots of really obvious kind of reasons. I think one of the ones which I did a little bit of work on a while ago was looking at the notion of a holiday in terms of almost from a reinvention point of view. It's almost like going on holiday and testing out a different version of yourself. And then doing that to either change jobs or do different sorts of things, in addition to the usual things about relaxation and resting and spending really good time with friends and family and so on. So I think looking at these kind of emergent psychological need states and then building new experiences and new holidays around those things through kind of collaboration is something that I think presents a really interesting opportunity for the industry. The trick is rationalizing survival with the kind of rapid shorter-term R&D, and then also at the same time the more longer-term innovation, and looking at how that can then be supported by new business models. It might be subscription models, for example, but also how you actually execute those experiences potentially through different collaborations. So, yeah, it's pretty bleak potentially, but then I think there's also lots and lots and lots of opportunities. I think things like this, it's a kind of crucible of new thinking, and those organisations that have got the right leadership in place and can be flexible internally as well as what they offer customers externally, we will be the ones that will navigate through this pretty successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Darren. And Tom, just to sort of come back to you on a few of the points that Darren was making there around being agile, developing really quickly. I know that you've got a few points on that. Was really keen to sort of see. I know you look at kind of the opportunity to solve existing problems that basically COVID has accelerated, and for tech and travel to work together. So keen to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to pick up on is this idea that lots of different organisations, whether they're airlines or destination companies or content providers or anyone in this space, it's kind of looking for solutions and in some ways getting to solutions quite quickly. Like if you look at some of the Caribbean destinations working with American Airlines, for example, and thinking about pre-travel testing in order to meet those countries' guidance of when they can actually get passengers in as a way of stimulating demand, reopening to tourism. There's other things like that dotted around the place. If you look at how Thailand might be reopening, for example, you can go into to Phuket, and then if you pass your negative test there, then you can go into the rest of the country from that point onwards. There's little sort of spots of answers, but it's quite a fragmented picture at the moment. And I do think that what Darren was saying about cross-collaboration is probably a kind of halfway house to what people are actually really used to seeing in the travel industry, which is at certain points in the journey, you see the same thing pretty much wherever you are in the world, whether that's a sort of, an airport environment or, it's the essential experience of a booking process, for instance. Now, if we can get to a point where there's still the differentiation that you have between different organisations, but when it's important, that sense of similarity in a new environment, I think that's a really, really important thing. And it's probably what replaces this question of giving people confidence. There is a subset of people, and I'll probably put myself in that group, who we're going to go and travel, right? We want to do it. If I could go after this webinar and go and get on a lovely EasyJet flight somewhere, I would definitely do that. Not everyone is in that point. And I'm sure that some people are thinking, oh, we're gonna book for summer next year, and we're going to see how we go, and it feels a bit flexible, and that's okay. But one way to get beyond this sort of sense of, ooh, I'm not quite sure, is, I think, to be saying, right, here's where it is going to be seamless, familiar. That makes sense. And a lot of that is going to come through that collaboration, but maybe it's in areas where people aren't necessarily used to collaborating.
Definitely. And Rachel, I know that you were talking a little bit about that when we were sort of just chatting over a coffee yesterday around, how you're looking at those different, I guess, segments of customers. So we'd be kind of keen to hear a bit more about that. And actually, once I'll come back to you, we've actually had sort of a question submitted for yourself around, because you mentioned around, so dovetailed kind of into this, kind of how you were able to react quickly to that changing travel environment that you mentioned before. And you mentioned how you're changing every week and month. So again, it would be kind of good to understand that a little bit better. A few examples of how you did that as well. Sorry, just
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Tom, that thing you said, I'm completely in that group of people who, the minute, if I can go somewhere and not have to quarantine or do a test on arrival, and I can come back to the UK without having to quarantine, I'll go there. And actually, I love traveling so much, I'll probably even quarantine, and I have done that this summer. So there's people like that in that group who actually, whatever kind of, if our prices are attractive enough, so our commercial proposition is affordable, and it's going to countries that I want to travel to, I'm willing to pay that ticket. And there's probably nothing in terms of an incentive or anything that I'm really, or Tom's really going to need to encourage him to travel. If EasyJet's got a flight for 50 quid to Catania or to Palma, we're probably going to book it and go. There's then the kind of next group down, I guess, who maybe want to go but are nervous that they're going to fly there, or maybe they'll book a few days in advance because they want to have that kind of surety that it looks like there's low COVID cases in that country and it's probably not going on the quarantine list. And they might need a little bit of nudging and a little bit of, you've talked about building confidence. We might need to help those customers kind of build their confidence a little bit to know that it's going to be okay. And we can do that, I think, Tom, through kind of really creative communications, really beautiful editorial content that makes that tapas tour in Palma just look a little bit more appealing to encourage that person to book. The next person down, I think, is someone who is really wants to plan a bit further. Maybe their families, maybe they're somebody who is bound by school holidays or work or by particular time periods. So they need to be planning a bit further out than a last minute kind of whimsical trip. And for those customers, I think it's really this is where I think the proposition needs to be around flexibility. So I'm happy to book a flight to, at Christmas to Geneva to go and visit, family or go skiing. But I need to know that if by the time, if by the beginning of December, Switzerland is still on the quarantine list, that I can change that to Italy and actually maybe change my plans. And is the airline or is the hotel or, whatever the travel experience that I'm trying to book with, are they going to give me the flexibility to do that? Because if they are, and lots of brands have done a brilliant job in this space. I think about Airbnb with their, full flexibility policy. Think about Eurostar. Again, they have a really flexible policy at the moment. And that actually, I think, does give people the confidence to be able to book, to kind of feel like I've got my options are open and I can plan a bit further out. I think what we've then done as an airline is absolutely revisit. So we had a full flexibility policy when we were in, we grounded our fleet earlier this year. And we had a full flexibility policy at that point because we didn't know how things were going to reopen. What we've got now, I think, is a really strong proposition that allows people to change for free at any time to any route. They just have to pay the fare difference. And they can do that up to 14 days before their plans change. If then a country comes on the quarantine list and it's, a couple of days before your flight, again, we will allow you to change that because we recognise that, getting people to their destination or to a destination is like a kind of key part of what we do, and our purpose as a business. And I think it's that group that have started to come back, and we've seen them come back over the summer. And I think for us, it's kind of, I think this is Darren, this to your point of like innovation and understanding like what's the next thing. I think for me is that final group. It's kind of people who, my mum's in this group, really reticent to travel, is concerned about the health risks, yes, but is also concerned about what the experience going to Greece is going to be like when she gets there. And I think that's the role that, I don't think that's the role of the airline, but I absolutely think that's the role of the tourist boards and of the wider industry to help, Tom, your business, to really help people understand what they're going to experience when they get there, and know that it's safe too. So yeah, I think there's all these different segments, and I think how we deliver communications and have the right product, whichever customer you are in, whichever bucket you class yourself in, we've got the product that's right for you.
I think that's spot on. I mean, something I worked on a while ago I used to work for it was another advertising agency, but I worked with the Tourism Ireland account. And one of the things that we developed when I was there was, Tom reminded me of this actually yesterday, was the Wild Atlantic Way. And that, if you don't know it, is the west coast of Ireland. It's absolutely beautiful. It goes from Donegal all the way down to Cork. And they wanted somewhere to get Americans to stay longer. So they just came up with a product. It was nothing new. Ireland's been there for quite some time. But you go through about 7 different kind of counties, and as you move through it, you have very, very different kind of versions and different kind of flavours of kind of Ireland. But it's united by, and it's a drive, and it's a little bit like the the Grand Tour that people used to do in the Victorian era. But it was to get people to stay for longer. You don't have to do the whole of it, but rather than just maybe stay at Cork for a long weekend, you could go and travel around. And I think Rachel's right. I think that's exactly the kind of collaborative innovation that I think would be really useful, because when they were developing that as a proposition, the role for us was all to say, okay, well, how can people in Ireland play a role within that? You've obviously got guest houses, you've got tourism centres. So you instantly look at an ecosystem of organisations that hire cars, you can stay, you can do things, and they can all participate in a central proposition that's predicated on exploring an amazing part of a particular country. Now, I mean, I know Italy pretty well because I go there and holiday an awful lot, and I've got friends who live over there. You could have something comparable in Italy, I think. And something else that I think we were talking about yesterday that I've read in loads of reports, which is potentially people are going on holiday for longer periods of time, rather than just a week or a short city break. They might go away for longer. So those are the sort of collaborative propositions and innovations that I think are useful, because they are beneficial to a number of constituent players within the industry itself. I mean, certainly everyone here would benefit from an emergent proposition, whether it's from Italy or Spain or parts of the States, if people start to go long haul, probably a little bit later in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing not to lose sight of, and it's a positive at a time when maybe some people are struggling to see positives, but as an industry, whether we're talking about DMO or experience organisations or airlines or all of them, we actually don't have some of the real albatrosses around our neck that have been problematic for some time. So, if we were talking about this at the start of this year, over-tourism would have been this massive thread. It would have just been an enormous thread. I took my family to Venice this summer, and there were 13 people in St. Mark's Square when we walked. We burst out laughing at the absurdity of it. Actually, there are ways that we can continue to make sure that isn't a problem when we get back to a more reasonable level of demand. Customers, travellers are now used to pre-booking, to accepting limited access, to maybe having timed visits to places, and to getting a lot more out of the experience for that reason. Now, some of that's due to lower numbers, that's true, but with careful management, there's the potential to spread visitors out in a new way to new places, and maybe spreading the spend of money at the same time. And that's, Darren, that's another big benefit of the Wild Atlantic Way and the North Coast 500. It's just off the scale in terms of its popularity here. Innovative packaging by airlines, possibly considering working with rail companies, could open up something like, Venice to Bologna with a rail leg in between, maybe even a rail pass, maybe even some accommodation, or, something like that. And it does feed into that. Stay longer, see a few different places, spread yourself out a little bit. And crucially, there is a benefit beyond just what you're offering, which is someone's going to get much more out of an experience than they would have otherwise to just in and out kind of thing.
Like for anyone that has done any type of even domestic travel this summer, the airport experience is just like it's so much calmer. It's much more relaxing. Yes, there's less people around, but once you get to your destination, I went to the theatre a couple of weeks ago when I was abroad, and you don't have to queue up at the bar to get a drink. Like that's normally like quite a stressful like interval experience. I completely agree that the end-to-end kind of travel experience overall I think will be improved as a result. There's something that you kind of mentioned there though about this kind of idea of longer trip durations, the kind of grand tour idea, and I think absolutely that's something that we've seen. People are booking longer trips because they're going somewhere for a longer period of time. But I think there's another trend that I think we've seen it anecdotally, and Darren, to your point, I don't think we're going to see it come through quite yet this year. There's been a lot of talk about it in the press, but I don't think we're seeing it actualized yet, which is this idea of working from anywhere. So business travel, look, you don't need to be an insider to know that business travel has really, dropped off a cliff. And I think it's showing very slow signs of recovery. And look, we're all stood here. I'm stood. You are all sat. Working from home. Meeting people, doing all of our standard business interactions completely remotely. So actually, you mentioned sustainability as well, Tom. From a sustainability perspective, I was taking many business trips a month, prior to lockdown. And actually, do I miss those? No, I'm enjoying spending more time at home with my family, and I'm saving loads of carbon. But I do still love the idea of working from anywhere, and I've done that this summer and trialled it. And loads of my team have. I have a team who, normally we are based in Luton. I've got team members who have been in Ireland, who've been working from Spain, who've gone back to their parents in Italy for 8 weeks over the summer, and it's just giving you again not just more a different experience. I've worked from the French Alps, from the Côte d'Azur, from the Balearic Islands this summer. I've managed to have these most amazing travel experiences with no one else around, but also by being paid and doing my job while I've been doing it. And I think that I'm probably a bit of an early adopter in that sense because I love travel so much, but I've read a lot of articles about it, and I do think that this is possible. We've talked about maybe longer gap years, and we're going to see a resurgence of a gap year. I'm just excited about it because I'm like working from anywhere.
I'm a bit disappointed now, Rachel, that you're not doing this webinar from a beach somewhere now, to be honest.
If it was 3 weeks ago, I would have been.
You can also see, just very briefly, Jamie, you can also see destinations picking up on that and realising that it's a potential replacement for lost revenue. The idea of a 12-month business residency visa just for that sort of digital nomad kind of person.
In the Caribbean, Tom, is that?
Yeah, that's right. And Bermuda, right. Around there, isn't it? Fascinating. Where do I sign up?
Here, absolutely.
There's even been hotels have kind of identified that, particularly in the cities where millennials are sick of being at home, tired of the four walls, and maybe used to a kind of co-working space environment anyway. And lots of hotels are turning or converting their kind of lobby space or communal space into much more like mobile office kind of working environments.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a load of questions submitted, so I'll try and sort of come to a couple of them. We've been talking there a lot about, I guess, you're communicating about the safety and the experience of of travel being just being really safe and safeguarding everyone and making sure everyone's healthy. And I know I even saw the kind of the Turkish tourism board. They had a really nice TVC, which was a kid getting to the hotel in Turkey with his parents and him seeing the world through the kid's eyes, thinking that the guy with the mask on is an astronaut and things like that. It's a really good ad, and kind of really showing the steps that they've taken to make sure everyone's safe. And there's been a question submitted here around, do we see that kind of safeguarding and well-being as a new purchase decision criteria? Is that going to remain? Is that something that should continue to be front and center in the way that brands like EasyJet are marketing to reassure people on that? Or is this kind of something that we're just doing reactively now and may sort of phase out over time? What do you think about that, Rachel?
Yeah, I think, look, safety has always been, as an industry in like aviation, safety is always and has always been like the industries and also EasyJet's number one priority. And I think this is just it's just added a whole other area. We call it biosecurity. It's just added a whole other area to our security and safety team's remit. From a customer communications perspective, anyone that's got has got a booking with us receives an email like a month before they fly, telling them, showing them what to expect. It's not unique to EasyJet. I think, all of our competitors have also done a brilliant job about, it's that collaboration piece about making our airport partners, our car hire partners, doing this brilliant kind of industry response to how do we make it as safe as possible for customers to get from point A to point B. And I absolutely see that as our role, but it's also, the role of our partners too.
Mm. Mm. And another question here, because we were talking a lot there around kind of flexibility and bringing that into the product and services being provided. And I had a question here saying, obviously that's a great step, but around kind of the FCO advice against travel to most destinations, along with quarantine, are kind of main barriers to travel and confidence. So just I guess a question to the panel, really, kind of how confident are we? Obviously none of us have governmental level insight, but how confident are we that these will be lifted soon to stimulate travel again? Does anyone know anything there? Any insight there?
Well, we obviously saw Grant Shapps yesterday sort of announce a review looking at, the potential shortening of the self-isolation period to destinations that aren't on that exempt list. Probably not the only person on this call who thinks there's a frustratingly slow timeline on that, and certainly everybody connected with travel has been pushing very hard for changes to that. Now, I think that a shorter quarantine period is one thing. I actually think it is about that end-to-end process. So if you understand that, okay, I know when I travel I've got to get a test 72 hours before. I know when I come back I've got to do something 72 hours hence, and then maybe the whole thing is doable. I think that's probably where we're edging towards in the medium term. But we're also still learning a lot, aren't we? We are at a point where we know much more than we have done. I do wonder / hope that we very quickly get to a point where we understand that what we're seeing of large amounts of household transmission of COVID, that being a high risk area, and indoor hospitality being another high risk area, we actually get further along the road of where we are, which is actually transportation appears to be one of the lower risk categories, and that's something that can also be sort of built into the messaging. In terms of where that goes as a barrier to travel, there isn't a silver bullet. I think we're going to have to be chipping away at these one by one, and also putting things as far as we can into the future. There are a lot of travel companies out there with niche products that are actually very attractive to book a year or so in advance. Maybe it's something like a cruise, or going to somewhere around a specific event. There's an eclipse. It's a long way away, but there's an eclipse in Antarctica in November 2021. Well, you'd need to be booking that far in advance for that anyway. So thinking very hard about niches and when you might be doing things, I think is another part of it too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I mean, I agree with Tom. I think that's a really that's the thing. So we were talking about a little bit in terms of that's a least deferred payment rather than destroyed payment. So I think where there's a lot of organisations, EasyJet, I think being one of them in part, where you can kind of go, do you know what, I fancy going to Prague this weekend, and you can go and get a flight to Prague, and you can go and stay in a decent hotel, and because of organisations like Lonely Planet, you can have a nice time, and you can find a version of Prague that works for you, and you come back and you've got some interesting stories. But I think that kind of like longer term planning and the deferred payment is really interesting. I know that I did some work a while ago, and we were looking at consumer attitudes to booking holidays, and not everybody, but there was a lot of people liked the process because they felt like a travel agent, and they liked sites that enable them to feel like a travel agent, that gave them inspiration, and I guess that's a great thing from a content point of view. And then organisations that would enable them to kind of create their own holiday rather than saying, well, actually you're going here and this is exactly what's going to go on. And it might not be for everybody, but I think Tom's right. I think we'll see a growth in those kind of niche, more kind of specialist organizations. And then if EasyJet is an organization who appears to be one of those who is trying to be as flexible and adaptable and quick turnaround as possible, hopefully they can take advantage of those kind of emergent behaviors, even if it's kicked into the long grass and these don't come aboard until next year. At least they're starting to see an end game, so that they can, at board level, they can start to invest sums of money in innovation. At the moment, it's very difficult because you're rationalizing survival with trying to come up with new product propositions. So you're having to work very hard, very, very, very kind of quickly. And as we've just been saying, in terms of the places and spaces where we are allowed to go, things are fluid. And I think we're just going to have to kind of get through this very, very tricky period until things do start to settle down, until we learn more about the virus, until test and trace systems kind of come in across the board for different countries. I mean, our country's making a howling pig's ear of that. Other countries have been much better. They've got more competent people running those organisations. So I think once we get through that, then I think things will start to settle down, and then it becomes easier for organisations to see clarity and therefore to invest in the development of different propositions.
Yeah, and I mean, if I reflect a little bit on something that Lonely Planet has done a lot of work on right at the start of this year, actually, was branded tours, which were sort of small tours in cities. So joining it up with Urban Adventures. The obvious development on that is into private tours. So, the idea that people, they want to have this experience, but they want to have it maybe just in their group of 3 or 4 or 5 people. And so they've got a guide who is appropriately distanced, and he's taking them out and doing that. I think that's an example of the evolution of the product that we might see. Maybe that even goes a step further in terms of bringing technology into things. And you have sort of, virtual reality or augmented reality, and you don't have a physical person in front of you, though in my experience that's the best experience, but that there is a sort of rapid evolution of the idea of someone pops up on your phone and explains to you why the Colosseum is this wonderful thing and why it looks like it does, etc. So in terms of the way in which products might evolve, I think that can happen quite quickly, and I also think it can be tapping into something that already exists.
Mm. And I think there's something you mentioned earlier has kind of sparked this, Tom, but I think that idea of actually being able to have travel experiences from your own home is where a really good example that sprung to mind is during lockdown, the small luxury hotels started doing, they have these excellent expert cocktail connoisseurs working at all of these beautiful hotels that are all shut up. They've got these amazing sets basically to give you a homemade cocktail experience in your own home. And I think that's where we've seen some real innovation in the travel industry and beyond in hospitality, of bringing those experiences, making them, there's people like my grandparents who won't probably ever now get to experience the Orient Express or a trip abroad, but actually we can, working with Relais and Chateau, can I bring that experience to them? Can I make travel much more accessible? And I think that's something interesting. The idea of exploring. We've seen a real resurgence in certain markets of domestic travel. Particularly in places like France, Italy, where you've Spain, where you've got quite big countries and different topographies. If I live in Paris, I probably do want to take a beach holiday, and again the travel restrictions not being limited to your own country we've really seen some demand recover there, and I think we've seen that in the UK too. Tom, I don't know whether you've seen that in terms of searches as well, of content and how that's been.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea that people are looking to explore their own destination in their own hometown, even prior to this, our guides app was most popular searches were to the most popular cities to visit around the world, and now they're to where we see our user base is. Los Angeles is the number one city now, and that really reflects the size of the audience that we've got there, and that's shown throughout. We can see where people are getting that from and downloading it too. And I think it gives a real opportunity for everybody who uses content in their products to think not just about the type of places that you're talking about, but the voices that you have around them. And the cocktail cocktail maker. Sorry, mine's gone blank. What do you call a cocktail maker? That's the one. That's it. Your local mixologist, but also who can take me on a tour of the East End of London that I'm not so familiar with, or show me a side of Paris that I just didn't know about. They're going to have a big audience, I think, for those things at the moment, and it can be a way to introduce your brand to people who think of you in certain ways. A challenge that Lonely Planet has wrestled with for a long time is, we're clearly relevant to people 3 to 4 times a year. How are you more present in people's lives, and how are you inspiring them on a daily basis? Great chance to do that. Great chance.
Yeah.
I think it's that thing of extending the holiday as well. There was a really, really good campaign that I think it was the Melbourne Tourist Board did quite a few years, about 5 or 6 years. You know what I'm going to talk about. And someone was essentially roaming. There was a couple of people roaming around Melbourne with a camera attached to their heads, and you could communicate with them. So we could be here now saying, I want to go and check out the music scene in Melbourne. And they would go off and say, right, okay, this is the main strip in Melbourne. There's a couple of roads I know in Melbourne that I've got loads of live music going on. And he would give you kind of questions. And that was a great way of you experiencing Melbourne before you get there. You could really work out, I definitely want to go to that restaurant. This looks like an amazing part to go to. I really want to go and check out the music scene over there. And I think it's those sorts of networking type innovations I think will be really, really interesting to both kind of enable people to inspire and plan a holiday before they go on it, and also what happens when they're there, and also what happens afterwards. Often people go on holiday and they go, oh, I'm really going to get into X, and then they get back from holiday and it just goes away. But if you could have something that would enable them to continue their holiday when they get back from the holiday in some way, that for me is an opportunity for a whole range of different business models.
Yeah, really interesting. Just a question that's submitted there whilst we were talking. So obviously talking a lot of great innovations there and getting people back to the idea of travelling. The question here is would the panel say there is still time for the industry to recover this year? If the task force helps to implement testing in the next month, for instance, will getting to destinations be an issue, even if demand returns, given reduced capacity? Any thoughts on that at all?
I can start. I think it's the reason that you didn't get a whole load of us jumping in and responding is because ultimately the answer is we don't know. I mentioned at the beginning when I gave my preamble that the context is changing week on week, almost daily in some scenarios. So I think, yes, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think what the task force have announced yesterday and this morning, a bit of an update in terms of what that means in terms of a tangible government action plan. But I think, as Tom said earlier, it's not just about reducing the quarantine period. It's also about whether, other countries will also have reciprocal agreements with us, and also the ability to even get your, for traveling to lots of countries at the moment, Italy announced actually yesterday, if you're traveling from a whole host of new countries have been added to the list. If you're traveling from any of those countries into Italy, you have to have a valid, clear COVID-free test within 24 hours of arrival. So it's not just the UK government restrictions. I think, look, if demand is there, one thing that we have learned as a business over the last 6 months is, and Portugal coming off the quarantine list is a really good example of that, and same with Greece, because do you remember right at the beginning that Greece was on the list, like we weren't allowed to go there, and then very quickly it came off. And we were able to pump in more capacity because there was clearly, demand. Spain was on the quarantine list, and we had loads that you said there was that pent-up demand. We had loads of people who wanted to go on holiday this summer. So we just diverted our capacity from Spain and put it into Greece. And I think that's the type of, normally in a normal period, our schedule is, secured, and that's it for the summer. And, the drawback of COVID is that we've had to cancel loads of stuff. We've had to move things around. But the benefit of it is that we now have a much more flexible schedule, which means if there is demand, we can put more capacity in. So I think I'm nervous about saying, because I think there's so many if this and if that, then maybe this. And it's also dependent on the COVID rate, staying low and stable, and hospital rates being low and the death rate being low. So I think, I think if there's an opportunity and demand there, then yes. travel.
Just
Yeah,
just
there's too many variables, isn't there? That's the problem. So you just have to do what Rachel was saying, which is we know there's a level of pent up demand. We know that those people with demand, that they really want to go on holiday, they want to travel, and for whatever kind of reasons, they're going to be much more acceptable where they go. I often prefer to go to Sardinia on holiday, but if someone sort of said, right, you can go and get on a plane now and you can go to Bratislava, I'd probably go, yeah, go on then. I've never thought about going there before, but yeah, why not? It might be interesting. I might enjoy the place. I might go there and go on holiday. And I think realistically, that's as much as you can do at the moment. There's that famous kind of phrase that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Well, I mean, you can apply that times 10 to what's going on at the moment. It's very, very difficult to plan for the longer term because of the fluidity of the situation which is going on at the moment. But having said that, if possible, and organisations can put time and money and brain power against it, there is the acceleration of trends that Tom and Rachel were talking about, and it's developing those things that are likely to start to develop and emerge in the long term. And whether you can get people to start giving you down payments now for those types of experiences, which might be in smaller groups, there might be longer form holidays. So you're trying to rationalise the revenue that you're getting in across a number of different time periods. At the same time, you're trying to rationalise the investments that you're putting against firefighting and survival, kind of R&D, rapid response, and the longer term planning. It's difficult. And I think it comes back to the organisations that will survive, not just in travel and tourism, but across the board. What we are consistently finding is those companies that over the last 10 or 15 years invested in innovation, invested in technologies, and they're run by people who don't just look at spreadsheets to work out what to do next, will be the ones that survive, because those will be the ones that can adapt quickly, they can pivot, and they can innovate, and they will take advantage of the emergent opportunities that will increasingly come on board over the next kind of 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. And those that it goes boom with the organisations that are run by accountants and have not invested and don't innovate and don't make sufficient efforts to understand their customers and the emergent need states of those customers and demand states and things of that nature. Those were the ones that are really, really in trouble. I think everyone else is going to have a rocky ride, but I think they'll come out of it because they've got the right people at the right levels in the organisations, and historically they've invested in the right spaces and places. And EasyJet, I used to work again in another agency, and one of the things that they did brilliantly was nick loads of business travellers from BA, because they just gave them a great experience. There was a bit of rebranding and there was some advertising that people liked. But it was when Caroline McCall was chief exec there. And that was the thing that really, really grew EasyJet. And they did that not just through advertising, but because the whole organisation got behind, let's go after the BA business travellers. And they nicked quite a lot of them.
I'd just add to that, agree with everything that both Darren and Rachel have said. Trying to strike as positive a note as possible. I've actually been doing some radio interviews today for a book launch Lonely Planet's doing. We are launching a book at the moment, right? So there you go. Just be bold and keep getting out there and keep showing up. But I would say, look, a better winter than seems possible right now could well happen. I think some of the things that we're identifying here, obviously, there's a lot of very doomy perspectives out there about how many years it takes to get back to 2019 levels. We don't know that. Nobody knows that at the moment. So anyone who's an expert and saying it's going to take 3 years or 4 years or whatever, I'm sorry, I take that with an enormous pinch of salt. That there is all kinds of things going on that could be very, very revolutionary to where we are today, and everybody's focused on solving these problems because all of our businesses depend on it. And what I would say is, I'm actually writing an article and have to submit it today, which is unfortunate because what's been happening overnight with our transport secretary and what it's been saying has meant I've basically got to tear the whole thing up and start again. So after this, deadline nightmare. The title of it is, am I going to be able to get away this winter? And that's a question that Lonely Planet we've been asked time and time and time again. It's about explaining that. It's about putting across that yes, destinations want to open up. Hawaii, which has been closed for months to anyone from out of states, opening up October the 15th. You need to jump through a few hoops. You need to get a negative test. You need to join their safe travel program. Very, very sensible stuff for a place like Hawaii. Hawaii is probably applicable to somewhere like the Canary Islands in terms of the way that might approach reopening. Mexico is actually open without testing requirements. Its largest market for travelers is the United States. Wow, I mean, there are different approaches that are going on to that, though I should say with a pinch of salt, all of this could have changed overnight, because these are notes I made last night, and it can change very quickly. But adding in pre-flight testing programs, adding in the flexibility that we're talking about, which is obviously really important, and in terms of just continuing to demonstrate that the richness of the travel experience, because I think that's something we haven't really talked about very much, is and everybody's been very much in the here and now of what's been going on in their own doorstep. And a few of us were lucky enough to get away over the course of the summer. One of the things that I really appreciated about that was that, I'd forgotten the interconnectedness of the world and how it's been, and how we were able to go, to Venice, and we took a train to Vienna, and we saw some friends in Vienna, and just enjoying that experience of moving and being with people, and that sort of emotional connection with the world is something that hasn't gone away, but I think it has become diluted in people's minds because you've got this giant thing in your face. Well, as we go through winter, as I'm talking to you now, it's absolutely hammering down the rain outside. It's horrible, right? And and I know, because I can think back to the times when I've done some work for the EasyJet magazine. They're absolutely brilliant with their imagery of just putting across, not just beach destinations, but city destinations, and in Egypt and all the kind of places like that. And it makes you go, oh, wow, that is, I want to be there. I want to do that. And putting these things together, I think, is the key to as robust a winter season as we can possibly have.
Really, really, really nicely and organically, sort of Darren and Tom there, you've always had those kinds of closing remarks, which I was going to tee up for you, but I think you've just ended there on some really interesting insights. So I'd like to just sort of, as you've got the honour, Rachel, of kind of having that final mic, really, just sort of dovetailing into what Darren and Tom were saying there. What would be, I guess, your key takeaways from all of that, and sort of looking forward to the next 12 to 18 months, what would be kind of your prognosis and top tips to people on the line today?
I think Tom kind of hit the nail on the head, which is that, we've talked quite a lot today about travel for the sake of travel. But actually, for me, travel is, for some people, it's about opening up new business opportunities. It's about, going and meeting someone so that you can grow your small business. But others, it's because they are, fanatic, Inter Milan fans, and the Champions League final is their event in the calendar, and that's how that, they travel because they love football. There are people who travel to Ibiza or Amsterdam every summer to go to EDM or, gigs and concerts, and people don't just travel because they like traveling like Tom and I do. People go traveling because it helps them do more of what they love. It helps them see their friends and family. Like VFR, what we call visiting friends and family, is one of the primary reasons that our customers are currently quoting for traveling. And we forget, I think, well, I do sometimes, because unfortunately for my husband, it's just the two of us here, and we're sick of the sight of each other. We're very lucky that we're close to each other and we're close to our family. My husband's actually a Kiwi. There's a huge chance that he's not going to get to see his family in New Zealand for quite a long time without having to stay in a hotel in prison conditions. But you forget that people travel to see people they love. But, it's not like a whimsical, yes, it's absolutely a privilege to be able to do it, but people travel for so many different reasons. And I think I just can't wait until we don't just start unlocking that first group of customers that I talked about before, who just are dying to travel, but we start making it possible for people to see their families again, to go and see their football matches played live with stadiums, full, go and see live music events. I think it's, all of the reasons that people travel. And I think so excited about some of the stuff that Darren said, and it's absolutely sparked, me to go back and push my team more to be like, actually, what are we doing to think and prepare for the future? Because I think it's for us, it's going to be about really balancing the short-term actions and stuff that we need to do and take for this winter, but also preparing for the future. What are we doing now to make next summer as strong as it can be?
Fantastic! What a perfect way to round off the conversation there. Look, I think apologies for anybody that we haven't kind of managed to sort of get round to questions, but hopefully some of that's been touched upon in the conversation anyway. I can see some of the questions. I think we've touched upon some of it, but obviously if anything hasn't been answered, do reach out sort of to myself, and we'll try and get your questions answered offline. Look, I think everyone will agree that this has been a really interesting session, and we're already getting some fantastic feedback in the chat here privately to myself. A lot of people loving the session, thanking you all for the time. For those of you, this might be your first webinar with us. Do keep an eye on your inbox for the future webinars. It's the first Thursday of every month. We tend to host these, and both inside and outside of your sector, there's a lot to be learned, I think. And so I'm sure everyone will join me in thanking Darren, Rachel, Tom for your time today, and thank you, audience, for giving up an hour of your morning as well to listen to us. The recording will be available as well, so look out for that in your inboxes so you can share that with colleagues and peers, etc. So yeah, one more time, thank you, Darren, thank you, Rachel, thank you, Tom, and we'll let you go. Tom, I think you've got a deadline to hit, as you say, so we'll let you crack on with that. And yes, thank you very much. It's been really enjoyable. Take care, everyone.
Thanks all. Goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.